Thanks for joining us. Today, we are breaking down Bill C-3, a law the government says fixes a longstanding injustice and critics say quietly changes what it means to be Canadian. It removes limits on citizenships passed through families born abroad, restores so-called lost Canadians, and introduces a new test for having a real connection to Canada. Supporters call it fairness. Skeptics call it citizenship by paperwork. So what actually has changed, and why is it sparking so much debate? I was lucky enough to convince Mark Morris, TPL contributor, lawyer, entrepreneur, and all-around good guy, just to chat this through with me. Let's get into it.
Patriotic means looking out for each other and fixing things together.
True patriotism is being in the country you love, surrounded by people you love, and great weather.
Being a patriot is being a part of your community and caring for it.
It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. Patriotism is the one thing we all share.
It's okay to be critical of government and still be a patriot.
It's gratitude to your country.
Of course I'm a patriot. I'm Canadian. It's my home.
Well, actually, true patriot love is the mission. Mark, thanks for taking the time to chat with me today. You know, it's interesting because you and I, before we start recording, there's a million things we could talk about. And you're one of the most knowledgeable guys, really with a focus on this nation that I think we have the pleasure of bringing on regularly. So thank you, man. I really appreciate this.
I actually similarly appreciate it. I have to tell you, I know politically we may go down different paths, but I believe that one of the strengths of Canada has always been the ability of various people to talk, come to consensus. And as long as there's reason on both sides, generally we're able to derive solutions and move forward. And I've always appreciated the fact that, you know, you guys are trying to deliver a broad variety of views. And I'm very grateful for being here.
Yeah, no, listen, we can always have discussions, right? I mean, even if we don't agree, it's so funny. You and I were chatting just before we recorded the show. And at the end of our chat, I thought, this is why we do this. I just learned so much. And in upcoming shows, I promise you, we'll get Mark back in on the topics we were talking about. But doing business with Asia is a great topic. Mark, let's pencil that one in for sure.
It's my favorite topic to talk about, actually, because so few North Americans actually quite understand the magnitude of what's taking place out there. You know, generally, Canada has been able to rest on its laurels for many, many years because all we needed to do was look to the States because they were the world's leader. But they're no longer the world's leader in so many different areas. I mean, they're still the world's leader in certain areas, but not for the vast majority. And when you go to China and when you actually see what's being worked on the basis of technologies, tech stacks, and everything else, it opens your eyes to the fact that the world is kind of moving beyond North America. And that itself is a discussion that should be had over and over and over on every channel.
All right, let's make sure that we pencil that in. Meanwhile, I should also point out, I think we're politically aligned now because I also vote for the Rhinoceros Party. So, but today we're actually, and I appreciate this, this is what happens. We sit down as a group, and I'll pull the curtain back a bit. We sit down as a group weekly and sometimes bi-weekly to see what's going on in the news and what's mattering most to Canadians. And we pick the stories that we're going to do and the topics and guests, and it all gets lined up. At the end of that, there's usually 2 or 3 stories that we still want to do that haven't been assigned to anybody. And our producers pick up a dart and they put their back to the list and choose who's going to do the topic and a potential guest that will align with it in some way and have a good discussion. And that's how you and I land on Bill C-3, the new birthright laws of citizenship for Canada. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. Let's talk about this.
No problem.
Now,
well,
people are going
I should caveat by saying this is not my expertise, right? Real estate, Asian business, that type of stuff I'm in. This one here I have opinions about, but it's not what my day-to-day is.
That's a great way to start this because also not an expert, just an opinion. And frankly, I just wanted to talk through this with somebody because I think that there are some outcomes from this that are not desirable, yet there's real good reason in some ways to do it. Bill C-3 is in effect now, as I understand it. And, you know, the critics are arguing people becoming Canadian citizens who have never lived in Canada is just a weird notion. But the truth is, this has been done by other countries, Britain, for example, and other countries for a long time.
Well, it's interesting when we have a discussion about immigration, about new legislation or anything else. What's really interesting is that we have, over the past 10 years, just gone through possibly Canada's first failed immigration experiment. Canada has always seen immigration as a huge benefit. And in fact, for most of yours and my life, immigration was, in fact, something that bolstered the bottom line. We had very selective criteria for who actually became a Canadian. Canada needs more people, so long as those people were educated, so long as those people came with assets, so long as those people were young. We could go into what the criteria were. We saw them as natural assets. And of course, what we saw under the last government was, more particularly than any other area, possibly a failure of immigration policy. I don't think that there's any denying this. Like, you can support whatever government you want, but you have to call balls and strikes. And boy, did the Trudeau government screw up immigration. And perhaps it's worthwhile
impacting so many other things at the same time. I mean, even creating polarity within our own country that we've never seen before.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the political ramifications of it were astounding. So let's just go over what happened before, because it may very well be illustrative to what it is we're trying to do going forward. So what we did, where we got screwed up, is Canada kind of rested on its laurels, and it said all immigration is good immigration. And it empowered bad actors in the form of colleges that weren't really colleges. They were called colleges, but they were anything but, like a barbershop or whatever it is. And so long as you were enrolled in one of these programs, then Conestoga College, and I'm going to pick on them because Conestoga happened to have been the worst offender by far. So screw it. They went down that road. Let's use their name. Conestoga College and others, many, many others, realized that there was a huge revenue source in promoting degrees, that they would be able to hire people to go to the small farmlands of India and say, you want to become a Canadian? Well, let's teach you how to be a barber. And suddenly, Conestoga College became a pathway to citizenship, which meant necessarily not that you were importing hairdressers or anything else. In fact, if you were importing young, eager hairdressers, that's great. Like, not everyone needs to be a lawyer or a doctor or anything else. Like, if you have youth, if you have drive, if you have, okay, no problem. But that's not who we were importing. We were importing.
By the way, likely if you're checking the boxes that create good citizenship immigration, they're not likely coming here to be barbers. I'm just being honest about that. There's
Correct.
Way too much being invested.
Yeah, like, after all, how many people should be in barber college, right?
Right.
yeah,
That's
100%.
the reality. Yeah,
it is the reality. And the federal government let this go for 2-3 years, during which time there was a mass explosion where suddenly Conestoga College and its ilk were able to determine that they could get farmers in India to give them their life savings, have them come to Canada, live in areas like Brampton, where they were living 8, 9, 10 people in a basement, which explains what the housing boom, that was the first effect, was the housing boom. And at the end of the day, academic experience had nothing to do with it. In fact, you'll recall, but a couple of years ago, just at the end of COVID, there were a whole bunch of protesters in Canada saying, how can you fail me? And the professors were saying, well, because this is not English. And they would hold up a piece of paper and it didn't even have an English word on it. And they said, that's not the deal. We're not here to produce English. We're here to give you our tuition, and you're here to allow us to get citizenship. Like, They knew what the deal was. Everyone knew what the deal was. The federal government turned a blind eye for 3 years, during which we had hundreds of thousands of people come and find a path to citizenship. And they happened to have been the wrong people, the people who were very different than what we've had before. But more importantly, because they came in such volume, they also disrupted hugely our real estate markets. They disrupted our low-end first-time job markets. Like, if you're 60, my daughter's 16 years old. She just got a job at a coffee shop. That has been made market, and to some degree, we all get our first job, right? You do your work, You sit there, you put on your apron, you say, hey, what can I do for your order, and everything else. Well, if there are 500,000 new people that are coming into the country, And they're all going for those same jobs. We're denying our youth as well that ability. And so what I'm getting at here is it's instructive for us to look at the last several years and the mistakes made by Fraser and the Trudeau government as they opened up the doors to citizenship with reckless abandon, whether by intention or not, doesn't matter. All that matters is results. We're adults. That's all that matters in this world. What happens, not what you want.
Well, so moving forward, I think you're right. As we take a look back, anything we do with citizenship needs to be done with real care, with better attention to it. Giving people citizenship outside the country is an extension of that in a big way.
Yes, it is. And if I may, Mike, just for 1 second, just before we go on to C-3, one of the huge ramifications of this immigration policy that was uncontrolled for 3-4 years was that Canadians turned against immigration. That Canadians politically said for the first time, oh, hell's no. Like this is not my Canada.
I mean, and it didn't matter which camp you came from. It was just the experience overall of Canadians. Wow, we've really overdone it.
Right. Everyone felt that, regardless of party. And that was a new sentiment for Canadians across the board. And all of this is to say, who we select into our country is of critical import. And we should always, because we're Canada and because we're privileged and because we have a country that people want to move to, regardless of what you may see on Twitter or X, whatever. The truth is, there are places in this world that are terrible, and there are people who are trying to come to Canada, and this is a promised land for them. Especially, by the way, and we can talk about this if you like, there are so many Americans who are now seriously moving to Canada for the first time. I've never experienced this, but I'm in the real estate market. I can't even tell you how many Americans are now looking at the Canadian option. We have a lot of opportunity here. We have a lot of opportunity, and we should be selecting from the best, the brightest, the smartest, and the most promising. Because lost in the immigration morass of the past several years, in addition to everything else, was our innovation. One of the biggest problems we have in Canada is we no longer have an innovative economy.
It's really stagnated in that. We don't really, I mean, I think that there's a certain focus by this new government under Carney to have a focus on that. I don't know if it'll deliver in time to meet the rest of the market globally, but I think you're right. And you just raised some thoughts in my mind as we started talking about this. When I was a young man, if somebody immigrated to Canada, I was proud that they came here. You're going to love it here. Welcome. You're going to have this experience. Don't worry about it. We're very accepting. We're very tolerant as a nation. It may take some getting used to the weather. I mean, I've heard Canadians apologizing to immigrants in the last 2 or 3 years. I'm sorry your experience has been this. Nobody intended for it to be this way.
Particularly,
and I wonder,
particularly in Ontario. Particularly
exactly, yeah. Ontario, Vancouver have had very similar experiences, I think, in that regard.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that certainly in Ontario, we have a scenario where you have to feel bad for people who thought they were getting to a new life, and it was a clear-cut path, and it's not.
What's interesting about immigration post-World War II in North America is after World War II, all of the money of the world was basically floating between Canada and the United States. That's it. That's where the assets were. That's where the money was. The money multiplier effect was taking place there. The factories were being built there. The jobs were there. This is where everyone basically was able to seek out new life. Now we are no longer in that same privileged position. In fact, there are many other areas of the world that are experiencing the same rise that we experienced in the 50s. They're now experiencing it elsewhere. And so what that means is, whereas before we never needed to compete with talent, we were just able to select for talent, we're entering into a much more competitive field from an immigration perspective, where a Chinese person can honestly look at China. Granted, there's a whole bunch of political reasons why you might not want to go to China, and I could go into it. But, when you're young, you're trying to support a family, you're trying to become rich, you're trying, you know it, I felt it, we've all gone through this. Well, do you think that your time is going to be better spent here in Canada or in Guangzhou with 72 million people in the greater area of Guangzhou, where they are flying around now in drones? Where is your future? Vietnam is a future.
As the rest of the world develops,
Correct.
Places that were less desirable have more to offer. The
Correct.
elevation, you're saying the elevation overall of countries that we thought, I mean, another one that comes to mind is Ethiopia. China has made a big deal of making that a very large tech and development and manufacturing hub, and it's changed the course of the future of that country.
Well, let's think about this. We have not only
and therefore their immigration to Canada.
We have Indonesia, which is a viable, amazing economy on fire. India, economy on fire. China, don't need to speak about that. Vietnam, don't need to speak about that. And the traditional G7, especially America, is looking less and less appealing with every single passing month. And so we have to start putting on our prom dress. This is no longer, I'm in sweats, you're going to want to take me out on a date anyways because I'm the hot one. And that's what we were dealing with for many years. We now need to care. We now need to structure an economy. And we now need to think very seriously about those people who are coming into our country, make sure that they're innovative to their core, and make sure that they are bringing the skills that Canada will need as it goes forward in this new multipolar world. And with that, this is a discussion.
Yeah, well, I think that this is actually, this is a great point. And so now as we look at citizenship, Bill C-3 seems to create a little bit of, well, you know what? I think that it like I say, I think that it's a very mixed opinion, almost on a 50-50 basis among the people that we've talked to here in the studio and beyond over the last couple of days about this. But it is a very important key thing for us to think about. How are we going to treat citizens abroad? Are we going to allow them multi-generational? This does allow that. Second and even third generation Canadians. What do you think the impact of that is for those that are kind of lost Canadians? I mean, it does repatriate a lot of people.
Well, let's talk about lost Canadians. Where are the vast majority of Canadians lost to?
U.S., I'm going to assume.
There you go. U.S., plain and simple. And why is that? Because you fall in love, because they have better weather, because I have my timeshare, whatever it is. You have relatives, I have relatives. Canada, the U.S., we're interchangeable. Generally, people even come to Canada and then they see Canada as a way stop over to the United States. There it is. So when we're talking about restoring lost citizenship, if we're truly talking about the actual effects, there is a high likelihood that the vast majority of that effect will affect Americans seeking to return to Canada, which, by the way, is a real factor growing because of the politics that's taking place down south.
I would assume.
I know this sounds odd because you don't hear about this yet, but my day job is a real estate lawyer. And we don't have a tremendous amount. We do like over 100 deals a month. So it's enough to have a pulse on the market. It's not overwhelming, but it's mainly Ontario. The amount of people who we have that are coming back from the States to Canada is fivefold increase. Now, granted, it wasn't very much to begin with, so I don't want to make this look like we're dealing with huge numbers. Fivefold from zero is still zero, right? So you have 0.01, like let's be clear.
But you're seeing a noticeable uptick.
Increase. And the reason they all say the same, which is political instability. I don't want to raise my kids. Here we go. So if we're talking about repatriation, what we are talking about is repatriation of people who share similar values to us, who share similar languages to us, who share similar economic theories of political organization. And to that end, unlike certain repatriations, this repatriation may very well go simply. Like if we are able to pass something like this, and if the States continues to devolve into something with greater and greater political uncertainty. And by the way, it doesn't matter if you want to agree with that or not, so long as a portion of the Americans believe that, and the left in America believes that, then that's going to be the portion that comes. So we're not having a debate as to whether or not that's the case. It's clearly the case amongst a segment of that economy. And that segment will overwhelm the Canadians because we're 37 million and they're 300 million. So even if you're talking about half the country that feels that way, that's 150 million as against our 337. So what we're talking about is we're talking about repatriating people with similar values, with similar education, with similar economic theories, with similar political understandings, with an appreciation of the rule of law. In other words, you are looking to take into Canada people who would naturally fit in the first place. And so it's not, to my mind, in aggregate, the worst thing to explore. I'm not saying I've thought through this in great detail.
Yeah, no. I kind of sit with you on this. It feels good to have some choice of the citizens that we will bring back here because they were already naturalized born Canadians or had Canadian citizenship. I think the danger comes on the other side, and maybe, Mark, you can refute this. First of all, some people will take a Canadian passport or a Canadian citizenship and apply it to a passport. And our passport is revered worldwide. If we start handing out passports to people who are living in other countries and they're taking advantage of it, how long do we have before our passport becomes devalued or more restricted around the world? It's occurred in other countries. I mean, of course, there's been countries that have commercialized their passports in the past, but that's one of the dangers I think people are worried about. And then just having this status rather than a real connection to the country.
Well, I think in order to answer that question, I think we have to think about the reason why the Canadian passport is a respected entity. Is it respected because of the quality of people we have in Canada? Or is it respected, and this is an important question, because if we're to answer this, we have to think about this. Or is it respected because of the values that Canada exhibits on a world stage going forward? Like, for instance, I don't know if you've ever traveled in Europe, but it's 80 years now since World War II. And none of us fought in that battle. And yet, right. Canada, if you go over to the Netherlands, if you go over to the north.
It's remarkable.
Right. I mean, because the values are more than the people. They're the actions of the country. And I don't know that that's going to change substantially, because Canadian values, whether it's a conservative or a liberal government, the Canadian values are somewhat the Canadian values. Yes, conservatives are more nationalistic in certain ways, and yes, they support certain metrics, and liberals are more multipolar, and yes, they have these particularities, but from the outside world, that's not the way the outside world sees it. They kind of see it as Canada, whether you're Diefenbaker times, whether you're Joe Clark times, whether you're Trudeau times. We all understand, screw off, you're screwing our country, but externally, I don't know that our reputation has been impugned in any way. And I think it's on that basis the value of the Canadian passport relies. But if I may say something.
That could change, though, Mark. What I'm saying is that there could be dramatic, for the first time in our lifetime, there could be dramatic change to who accepts a passport from a country that offers, and this is not today, but I think down the road, and this is not necessarily my belief, but it is one of the fears that you hear critics saying, is that it opens the door to non-naturalized Canadians getting passports, therefore making it more difficult for the rest of the world to take our passport so seriously.
Yeah, it does. And I understand that. I understand the argument. I shouldn't say it does, but I understand that argument. That argument makes some sense. What I'm experiencing in the world, I don't know if you see it, but I travel a lot. And whereas when I'm sorry, my dog, I have an office dog, and it's mail time at the office, and my dog is currently yapping away at the mailman. I'm sorry.
At least I know whose desk I can find some treats in next time I visit. Okay. That's fine with me.
If you think about it, we used to be graded entirely by the character of our passport. That's what used to be the case. Like, who are you? You're Canadian. That defined who you are. There are other definitional characteristics to people now when they travel that have nothing to do with citizenship. And this is in an era of wealth gone mad. What socioeconomic class you belong to, what economic status you bring to the table is, to my mind, mattering more and more when I travel. Now, maybe that's because I'm getting older, I'm not sure. But no one cares if you're from Saudi or if you're from Canada or if you're from Venezuela. No one cares if you have assets behind you. And that's a sad indictment of our system, by the way.
I was going to say that is a little saddening to my heart, because
totally sad.
It is part of what makes Canada historically. I think even that imagery that you painted in our mind about post-war heroism, you know what, that is part of what is the flavor of Canada, is part of that maple syrup.
But an ideal world is one where you're judged by the content of your character and not your assets. And this is the great vision. This is what you want. You want people to be governed by who they are and their actions, and not just by what they have, which for a long time was a singular passport and now is dollars or euros or anything else. We are definitely devolving into almost what is, on an individual level, I think almost a post-national sort of world where, I mean, I don't know about you, I saw what was happening down south, and the first thing I did was I got my kids European citizenship. So my kids and my wife are now Polish. We just got it. It took 8 months. And how hard was that? I literally just applied. I got the EU citizenship, and well, I didn't. I'm the only one in my family that doesn't have it, but my family has it now. And does that?
I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going through the process right now of investigating my Mexican citizenship and passport because my wife is Mexican.
Right. And there's so many of us that have traveled for so many different places. Like, we are all capable now of getting more than one passport. We're all capable of actually acquiring citizenship. I'm just not sure citizenship has the same role that it once did relative to other things like money, like status. And that's a sad indictment, to be sure, but it doesn't make it any less true.
Mark, do you think this is true? Now, we talked about immigration spun out of control, which is, the general feeling out there, I think, across the country. And does this feel to you to just be bad timing to be discussing this? Because overall, as you and I talk about it here, the truth is, I don't think it has much impact on us as a nation, but it is a really nice generational move to give people the option to bring their families back to Canada, or for somebody who is currently not under citizenship that might want to land here as a citizen, participate in a college program, begin their life.
And I see that being a great, well, let's consider the fact that there are 2 times that people would ultimately want to move to Canada, but the vast majority of times that people pick up and move is usually when they're young. That's usually what happens.
Yeah.
To the extent that we have a bunch of Anglos and Francophones that are now living in France, Britain, and America, that had Canadian lineage, that may want to come back, that have the resources to come back, that actually say, I have the gumption to set up here and everything else. I don't see that as a bad thing. I think that might very well attract the right immigrants, the very people that we are looking to actually bring into this country. I think we have to be on guard about the immigrants we bring into this country. I think the past 10 years have taught us that massively. And when they are of different cultures, that's not to say we shouldn't have different cultures that come to Canada. We absolutely should. But we bring in enough of a single culture within a very limited period of time. And what you do is you build walls as opposed to being able to actually
integrate people.
Exactly, integrate. And
it's so funny that you say that because, here's a good example of what we do here at TPL. You got a conservative and a liberal agree on almost every point here. But I do think that you're right. It gives us as Canadians a little bit of pride. It gives us a rung on that ladder of pride that we can step up and say, you can continue to be Canadian. You can come back and be Canadian. Once a Canadian, always a Canadian. We kind of need that patriotic pride, and it's a great way to build heritage in a young country. We're a young country.
Heritage is the right word. That's right.
Yeah.
And by the way, what you should realize in immigration is that those young people who immigrate usually have a higher than average salary that nets to them after 10 years of being here. Immigration, when done properly, has such positive effects on an economy. Let's just take a look at some historical examples because they're fascinating if you think about them. When did America hit its heyday? When would you say America hit its heyday? It's industrial heyday.
I'm going to say post-war, they really came at it, right?
Yeah, probably the 1970s.
Cars, the American dream. Yeah. Yeah,
probably the 1970s was like the industrial, like everything was America. All the factories were there, you name it, blah, 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 blah. Just pre-Reagan. Well, okay. What happened right after World War II? Well, we stole all of the German scientists, all of them. We just took the entire German rocket team. We took the entire German scientific industry. We took every person who had net worth. We brought them over to the country. We said, start up again. Here we go. Argentina tried to compete with us, but we were more successful. And
I was going to bring that up. Thank you for mentioning it.
And boom, we suddenly 20 years later had a boom.
Yeah.
I was just in Israel. Israel had a similar experience. In 1991, the Soviet Union fell. Now, the vast Jews, being Jews, have always somewhat prided education, and there's good reason for that historically. It's because that makes you mobile, by the way, so that when the Nazis come, you can actually run. That's actually the reason that Jews are in diamonds. It's because and real estate. It's because real estate is easily liquidable, and then diamonds you can shove up your rear and then kind of travel wherever you need to go. It's actually
who hasn't done that? Am I right, Mark?
Sorry, who hasn't done that on a Saturday? Anyways, the be all and end all is when the Soviet Union fell. There was a huge movement in the 80s to get what were called the refuseniks out, which were a whole bunch of Jewish people from Soviet Union. And when the walls fell, Israel took in all of these scientists. Yeah. The entire Russian scientific corps came to Israel, this small little country. And then 20 years later, similar to what happened in America, boom, you have Startup Nation, you have foundational, you have the quarries, you have the Intel plants, NVIDIA, there's a reason it's happening there. It's because 20 years ago, they took in all of the immigrants with all of the actual. So my point is that when history presents itself with opportunities, and when you can take in the right people en masse, if you can do that 20 years later, you are going to have a boom. And it's important to think about that because of the instability that is now taking place south of us. There is one place that the vast majority of Americans will go because their families live in the United States, and it's here. And we are now at a position where Carney has smartly, look, you might not like all of his policies, but one of the things he did is he put aside billions of dollars to get American academics and talents and scientific and said, we are Canada, you are safe, let's go. And that is a massive immigration strategy that the Canadian government has adopted, hopefully with the same efficacy as what happened after World War II and everything else.
Mark, you're a great conversation, my man. Thank you so much for this discussion. I promise we will rebook when you've got a moment. I know you travel a lot, but I would love to talk about a different perspective on doing business in China, because right now it's a very touchy time with our neighbors to the south. And at the same time, our country is looking for opportunity that doesn't exist in the U.S.
Not to cross promote in any way, but I just did Ron Butler's show last week on my adventures in China halfway through. And I would be more than pleased. I mean, a lot has happened since that show. I'd be more than pleased to speak to you about it. It has to do with geopolitics. It has to do with the future of our economy. It has to do with where our kids are going to find their potentials in the future. And it has to do with Canada's opportunity, because at the end of the day, Canada is, we want to claim it's a special place, and it is. We love it. It's, oh, Canada, home and native land and all that. But what we really are is we're a country that takes stuff out of the ground and gives it to other people. And those people happen to have been the United States for many, many years. And it's changing very, very quickly. And there's another person with a voracious appetite. And so understanding who that person is, how they work, and the nature of politics out there is something I've been trying to educate myself on for about 10 years. And I'd be very happy to speak about it because it's fascinating stuff.
I'm going to bring Paul McCucci in. We'll talk about it like a group in a round table, and we'll do that in the next week. Meanwhile, Mark, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Details about Mark Morris, where you can find out more about him, are in the description for today's show. Don't forget to subscribe. Tell a friend about what we're up to here. And for goodness sake, visit tplmedia.ca. Thanks. We'll see you next time.
My best.